Proclus then gives an account of many different things that these two discussions teach us, right? On the one hand, the ideal form of the Constitution, on the other hand, the narration of the War of Atlantis. So let me uh, slide down here. Okay. So he writes, the former revealed the essence of the encosmic kinds. The latter revealed their powers from which the activities advance into the universe. The former gave a sketch of the first creation in images, the latter of the second creation. Or if you wish, the former presented the formal cause, the latter the material cause. Indeed, all the philosophers of nature put forward the opposites as principles and established the cosmos resulting from the harmonization of opposites. But harmony and order derive from ideal form, which, starting from the Constitution, Socrates' account has revealed as common to and extended to all the multiplicity that proceeds in order. Okay, I'll discuss that last bit that also went over the page later, but what else is he saying here? So he first distinguishes the two between the account of the ideal city and the account of the Atlantean War, as the one tells us the essence of the cosmic kinds, and the other is it revealed the powers of the cosmic kinds from which the activities advance into the universe. So this has to do with the setup of the Timaeus, where Socrates tells again the story of, or not the story, but the analysis of what the ideal city should be like. But then he says, "Oh, I wish I could see it alive. I wish I could see this city in motion." And that's what the story of Atlantis is supposed to tell us, right? It's supposed to show us this ideal city in action, being ruled in the way that it's supposed to be, and so on. And in a exemplary action, which is this war. So the account of the city gives us the essence, right? So essence here translates ousia. So it's not just the what it is, but also the enduring presence, right, of the things in the world. What are the things in the world called here? They're called the cosmic kinds. Kind translates genos here, right? So it's something like lineage and or ancestrality, right? In Portuguese, right now, I'm translating genos as ancestralidade, which can be both an abstract relation of being the ancestor of having having a common ancestor, but it can also be the community, right? That's constituted by this relation of being an ancestor. Just the same way, like in English, you can say community for both the bond that binds a community and the individual members. And Genos has a bit of both. Of course, Genos is also can just refer to like genus and or kind, and then it means little more than uh, a group of things that have that what they are is the same. They have a common nature or essence. However, I think it's important to grasp that there's supposed to be a causal relationship. There's a productivity amongst the members of this kind, right? Of course, kind is cognate with kin, and so there is, in English in principle, this is present, but we don't hear it. Who thinks of kin when you mention kind? And who knows? And maybe I'm totally making up the etymological connection, but I think not, because right, you could also get kind, and kindred, and things like that. But um, So the encosmic kinds. So these are the groups of things that share common essences, that transmit common essences across from one to another, that exist in the universe. And so and we can think of these in two directions, maybe. We can think of it horizontally in terms of, for instance, the philosopher kings, the guardians, the productive classes, right? So these are, respectively, the theoi, the daimonis, and the transmigrating lives. Or we can think about them vertically, right? So, for instance, there's Mars, right, which is the in cosmic Theos, the in cosmic Titan, Ares, who is responsible, for instance, for the regular motion of the planet Mars. And then there are the daimones that are subordinate to him, and then there are the um, transmigrating lives that are subordinate to those daimones, right? So that they're thinking about these kinds of vertically. Be that as it may, um, the account of the ideal city gives us both its division into horizontal classes and also the relation of subordination amongst those classes. So it gives us both the horizontal and the vertical relations I talked about, and it just says, okay, these are the things that there are, and that's the reveals the essence of the uncosmic times. However, the war talks about how these kinds interact, right? So there are some beings in the world whose function is to multiply things, to make them bigger, to make them more differentiated. Whereas there are other things that are supposed to establish things, define things, limit things. And these two things have to interact in order for the universe to exist as it does, right? And so the first tells us about the what there is, right? Who are the agents of our story? And the second tells us about the story as it happens, and therefore it also tells us about what each character in the story can do. It shows their powers going forward and producing activities. Um, And then he says that the former gave a sketch of the first creation in images, the latter of the second creation. So, what are these two creations? These are two divine activities that Proclus sees described in the Timaeus and also in other texts, where one is the establishment of the structure, the perpetual structure of the cosmos. And this is the task of the primary demiurge, the primary engineer of the cosmos, who is, as it were, the structural engineer of the cosmos. So he establishes that there are four elements, that the four elements are harmonically or are that they have a harmony amongst them. They're not opposed to each other. That they are all in soul. They all receive a common life from a common source of life, and that this source of life moves uh, regularly according to time, right? So he establishes, as it were, all the structures, and that the source of life of the cosmos, its psyche, is divided into these different circles: the circle of the same, the circle of the other. So everything that is perpetual and structural is has as its cause something a an unchanging uh, cosmic engineer that is the primary demiurge, that is Zeus, right? However, there are also, as it were, local feats of engineering, subordinate feats of engineering that aren't about the structure of the cosmos, but about the content of the cosmos. So, for instance, that there always have to come to be, new human beings have to be born, new horses, new bees. There have to be a cycle. There has to be a cycle of the seasons, and these are all things that are divinely and perpetually produced, but they are produced in time. They're not part um, of the structure in the sense that they always exist. It's not always summer, it's not always winter, right? And so this is all part of the secondary work of engineering, which is the responsibility of Titan subordinate to the cosmic engineer, right? And so these are, and ultimately, it's the responsibility not of Zeus, but of Dionysus, right? So that's this distinction. He's saying that so that the account of the city gives an explanation, gives us an image of the activity of Zeus, right? This makes sense with Zeus as a lawgiver. Zeus is a source of justice and order in the Olympian pantheon. Whereas the secondary creation is represented by this battle, and that makes especially sense because, as I said, the battle between Athenians and Atlanteans is supposed to be a human anthropomorphized image of the true battle between the Titans and the gods, and especially the activity of and Titans here meaning in this in as it were the stricter sense of the those gods, those theoi that are eventually banished to Tartarus, right? And that oppose themselves to the Olympians. And they are associated with the myth of Dionysus, who is ripped apart by the Titans, and this is and therefore these Tartarian gods are associated with the production of separation of things being ripped apart, of having separate parts in the world, because the world is such that it's not everything is everywhere, but each thing occupies just one place, and an image of this is how Dionysus is ripped apart by the Tartarian gods. So that is the way in which the account of the city gives an account of the primary creation, the account of the war gives an account of the secondary creation. And then he gives another thing, which is that the former gives the formal cause. So the description of what a city is, of what the ideal constitution is, tells us that is the structure of the world, whereas the latter is the material cause. So it is that through which the world is constituted, right? That through which the world makes itself. That is the opposition of limit and unlimited. So that's interesting because if we put that together with this idea that the first uh, that the account of the city gives us the substance, the ousia, the enduring presences, the agents of the world, whereas the war gives us their powers and activities. What he's saying is that the enduring presence of the agents of the world employs as matter, employs as its instrument and basis their powers and activities, right? So the things in the world are such that they are what they are by doing what they do, right? And he gives here then an argument for this idea of why this should be. Indeed, all the philosophers of nature put forward the opposites as principles and establish the cosmos as resulting from the harmonization of the opposites. So, since the war is about opposites coming together, and opposites coming together is what the philosophers of nature, so there's those pre-Socratic philosophers that talked about everything, for instance, coming from the infinite, or coming from fire, coming from water. So, since they talked about the the basis for things changing from one form into another, and that basis was this harmonization of opposites, and the war is about the harmonization of opposites. Therefore, the war is about the material, right? And right, and I just glossed here matter as that which explains the ability of things to change form, and that's a very useful way for you to remind yourself of what actually is the material cause in something. So, for instance, sometimes people think like, what is the material cause in a wooden chair? And they say, well, it's wood because it's what it's made out of. Okay, what does the wood explain? If it's a cause, it's a kind of explanation, explain something about that chair. And someone might think, oh, like the wood will tell us how hard this chair is and what the texture is like. None of that is actually about the material cause, because you have to think that the artisan who made that chair, he thought about like how hard does this chair have to be in order for someone to be able to sit on it, and what do I want the chair to feel like? And this is everything about what the chair is. All falls into the formal cause, right, that he's implementing. What the material cause, qua material cause, what the wood as such tells us is what that is that this chair, it can be used to feed a fire, that it can be broken and then it becomes something rather pointy that you can use as a to hurt people by scratching them. It is something that can generate splinters. The material cause, qua material cause, doesn't tell us things about like texture and toughness and hardness. No, it tells us what can this become, right? And the constant battle of opposites in our world, this tension between limit and unlimited, is what explains that things can change into other things, right? And here we have, as it were, as like a point of contact between Neoplatonic metaphysics and Chinese metaphysics, right? And the I Ching, which also, as far as I'm no expert, but as far as I've learned, is also about how you can somehow figure out the basic forms of change, right? There are 64 basic forms of change, or well, more if you take into account pairs of hexagrams, stable and changing. Then you have these basic forms of change, and they're all based on this fact that things are constituted by this tension between fullness and absence, or limit and unlimited, right? But that's just a parallelism that I like that is very fascinating for me, and I just wanted to mention it. So that's why the war indicates the material costs, right? Because it's this permanent tension in all things between limited and unlimited that explains how they change and how they can change. But then he goes on, but the harmony and order derive from the ideal form, which, starting from the Constitution, Socrates' account has revealed as common to and extending to all multiplicity that proceeds in order. For that constitution is transmitted in different forms, whether in the soul or in human beings or at the cosmic level. Socrates' recapitulation, which gave a sketch of the actual ideal form of the constitution, wholly separated from matter, reveals to us at the primary level of constitution in the universe, and it is to the same form that it is eager to relate the parts absolutely as well. So his point is like, so if the tension between limited and unlimited is what explains the um, the ability of things here to change, what explains what they are is this common political structure, which exists at the cosmic level and also amongst human beings, as many cities, right, which succeed or rather fail in embodying this in different ways, and then in our souls, which also succeed or fail in embodying this in different ways, right? And so this is um, the common form that unites the whole cosmos and tells us what it is, right? So the account of the city tells us what it is, and the account of the war tells us how it can be other things, right? How it can succeed or fail in embodying this what it is, right? And so that's the sense in which these two accounts also give us a um, uh, formal and material cause.